Hello, very good morning. Welcome along to IrelandAM on Virgin Media One.
It is Thursday, the 26th of September, and here is some of what we've got coming up today.
Now, I'm sure you've seen it.
What? What are you talking about?
There it is.
Oh, that's very pretty. What's that?
The Tánaiste Micheál Martin has branded the 1.4 million euro spent on this security hut with the lovely sweep in the Department of Finance as ridiculous. We are going to have the latest on that and the bike shed yesterday as well.
What's the bike shed? I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, listen, we're going to be discussing that very shortly.
We'll talk about it in a while. Yesterday, there were protesters. They were outside Leinster House. They were calling on government to review the ban on XL bully dogs. That's come into force now. We're going to be discussing it at 7:35. A ban on the breeding, on keeping them. You'll have to have an exemption if you have an XL bully dog. What do you make of this? 0896 111 111.
Yeah, we would love to hear from you on that. And a little bit later on in the show, former Irish rugby star Gordon Darcy is going to be here telling us why he's teamed up with Olympic rower Sanita to claim another sporting title, all in the aid of a good cause.
All about the good causes, our good cause. Alan Hughes, morning.
I'm here.
Get you on the road.
Doing my bit every morning.
You are. How are you after the yoga yesterday?
I'm actually quite good, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Delighted.
Also coming up on this morning's show, how to dodge WhatsApp scammers. That's coming up at 7:45. Plus, if you're not sure what to be watching at the weekend, well, don't fear, because Lloyd is here and he's going to share the best of TV and film releases. Also, our resident scientist, Phil Smyth, is teaching the science of sound. That's a little later on. Or no sound. We'll just be quiet. We won't talk.
People will probably enjoy that, Al, to be honest with you. Looking forward to that. Thank you very much. Busy old show coming your way. Now, yesterday, the board overseeing the National Children's Hospital said it fears missing the completion date of June 2025.
We'll also be finding out what's going on with Israel and Hezbollah and what's happened overnight. We'll be reviewing today's top stories. It's coming up very shortly on IrelandAM. Welcome back. It's time now to take a look at this morning's papers. We're going to start with the Irish Times, the headline there. Varadkar calls for pledge on Irish unity. He goes on to say that every party running in the next Dáil elections should make manifesto pledges that Irish unification is, quote, an objective, not an aspiration, and back the establishment of a new Ireland forum to plan for it.
Mortgage price war on cards as AIB cuts fixed rates again. The banking group is reducing one of its key green rates and its 4-year fixed rate by 0.2 percentage points each. That's the front of the Irish Independent.
The Examiner leads with BAM clash with Hospital Board on delays after 7 years, 14 delays in completion dates, and a cost that could rise even higher than the 2.2 billion now estimated. There is still no guarantee children will be receiving treatment in the new National Children's Hospital by 2026.
The Sun leads with another kick in the huts. It continues stating a government security hut that cost over 1.4 million euro has been described as value for money. That's according to the OPW, which spent 336,000 euro on a bike shed.
Unsurprisingly, the Herald, the Mirror and the Daily Mail all lead with that story.
And finally, the Star goes with a slightly different take on that story. Its headline, Tango and Cash. It goes on to describe the Department of Finance security hut as having a roof like Donald Trump's hairstyle. Tánaiste Micheál Martin has branded the 1.4 million euro expenditure as ridiculous.
And trust me, we are going to get back to that story very shortly. But joining us this morning for what's happening in the news, political editor for the Business Post, Daniel Murray, and News Talk, Sean Defoe. Thank you both so much for being here. We're just going to go
morning, guys.
What's happened overnight in the Middle East, Daniel. France and the US have pushed for a 21-day Hezbollah-Israel ceasefire in Lebanon. Quote, all hell is breaking loose, says the UN chief Anthony Guterres. But Israel has said they might do a ground offensive into Lebanon?
Yeah, there's a concern. So, I mean, after Israel started its air bombardment of Lebanon in more recent days, now a concern that they could actually mount a ground offensive and move troops in there. There's some indications of that from generals. Certainly, I think people feel that the Middle East is really at a cliff edge here, and that the possibility of all-out war breaking out across the region is there. As you say, the US and France are now calling for a 21-day ceasefire between the US and Lebanon, and that's something that a lot of people are getting around the table to try and make sure that can happen. The concern is that if it does become a more broader regional war, it is something that's much more difficult to get a handle on. Already there's ongoing peace talks between Hamas and Israel, being facilitated by the US and others to try and bring that to an end. Suddenly, if you have to bring in Hezbollah and other parts of the region, it becomes much more difficult to keep a handle on.
Looks frightening. All right, and of course we'll keep you up to date on if there's anything else going on over there on Virgin Media News. Let's move on to the story on the front of a lot of the papers, of course. The OPW, the Office of Public Works chairman and staff, John Conn, was in front of the Finance Committee yesterday. So let's talk, we'll start off with the front of the paper. Is this €1.4 million spent on a security hut at the Department of Finance, Sean?
Yeah, he went in to talk about the expensive bike shelter and ended up digging a further deeper hole, a €1.4 million hole.
Because there is an underground area in this.
There is an underground area. That's what he was saying.
Did dig a hole,
Literally
quite the hole.
I'll never be able to think of it as anything but Donald Trump's hairstyle again, by the way. Especially being made of copper.
It just, the image is... there we go.
Just remarkable.
And now that's all I can see.
Now,
and I used to think that was beautiful architecture. And now I'm like,
now it's Donald
But I gather lorries are finding it difficult to get past that wonderful hairstyle structure.
Because it's quite a narrow, there's quite a big lip on it there on the left-hand side, and it's quite a narrow space to get in. Initially, I didn't know where this was because the foot entrance to the Department of Finance is somewhere else. And though I've been on Merrion Street every week for the last many years, I've never actually noticed this or seen it. So this is the security barrier for where they drive in and where the deliveries and everything else go in, sort of at the side of the Department of Finance.
Yeah.
€1.4 million sounds like a ridiculous amount of money. The OPW is saying actually it's not an overspend, it's justified spend. Now look, you can see there are bits gone in there, that ramp that had to be dug into the ground, electric to the thing that would be a little bit more expensive than you would think.
CCTV and cabling, but I mean,
but to be
come on, $1.4 million, Daniel.
It doesn't make sense, and obviously it's coming fresh off the bike shed controversy, which itself cost over $300,000, and it doesn't even, I think it has one wall, doesn't even have three walls. At least this one actually has four walls, so maybe an extra $400,000 per wall is what they're looking at. But yes, all of the different costs being cited yesterday, security consultation, all of the wiring, CCTV, apparently advanced communication systems. But having that, I mean, you could buy a mansion in D4 for $1.4 million. It just doesn't, with a lot of those fittings as well in it. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. Obviously,
this is what it looked like, and this is what it looks like now.
The before and after.
Yeah. And to be honest, we all give out about the state of an awful lot of our towns and villages, how they're just lashing things up and they look absolutely disgusting. It's really beautiful. It's nice to think about architecture, but in all fairness, lads, 1.4 million.
Yeah, certainly the price doesn't seem to make sense. The politicians at the committee yesterday making that point, the Taoiseach coming out while he was in New York, having to comment on this while he's on a foreign trip and saying that it was ridiculous. And I think it concerns people because it seems to be a trend in terms of the OPW, the bike shed. Well, remember a couple of years ago, it wasn't the OPW now, it was the Houses of the Oireachtas, but the printer debacle, which I think ended up costing over $2 million just to get a printer into Leinster House. There was a wall that had to be knocked down to bring it in. So these are the kind of concerns about waste of taxpayers' money.
So let's go to the bike shelter now, which is where they were meant to go to talk about this. And then we're like, hold on, what's costing everything? With the bike shelter, they said that they wanted to place it somewhere else, like where it wouldn't really be seen and it could have been cheaper, but that they went to the Oireachtas committee. The County Corla is involved in that, and they said, no, you can't have it there. And that's why it got so expensive.
Yeah, it's a bit stupid, really, isn't it? Of an excuse. So they were talking about putting it basically down a side lane between the Department of Agriculture and Leinster House down there, and they were told they couldn't put it there largely because ministerial cars go in through there, and it's sort of a place where they park. And instead, they decided to put it on the front lawn as it is of the Merrion side of government buildings. Now, it's still absolutely ridiculous and farcical that it cost this much. And there's a few kind of tail-offs to it. One is that there's going to be now a new review that any spending between 200 and 500,000 has to go to another manager and do more checks. Amazing that wasn't in place in the first place.
Come on, Sean. Somebody signed up.
But it's like
they
the whole thing.
He was justified by saying we're going to conduct an external review on this.
And this was the result of the external review. It shouldn't.
And that's going to cost more money.
The problem
is going to who's going to be accountable?
That's it, nobody. Nobody's going to be accountable. That's the way it works, Tommy. The civil service works, and it's ridiculous. And it's going to be, I think, a really, really big issue for the government, particularly now coming into the election, because you have two prime examples now, on top of the National Children's Hospital, which we're going to talk about in a bit, of how the government and the civil service cannot control spending on money. And their whole argument has been the economy is going gangbusters, we did it, trust us to keep things going. And when they are spending, 4 times the average cost of a house on an entrance into the Department of Finance, the cost of an average house on a bike shelter, how is anyone to believe?
Look, if they're not going to lose their job, because if I'm going to get building work done, I'll get a couple of quotes and you'll try and pick the best quote or the best one. But if their job, they're not going to lose their job. There's no consequence on them, so there's no reason for them to do this.
That's often the way across a lot of the public sector and the civil service. You know,
but is that good enough, Daniel?
No, I mean, it isn't. It isn't necessarily good enough, but and there has to be more accountability for the spending of taxpayers' money. To be honest, the way I see this going is that there's probably going to be a much wider review of spending inside OPW. That's not something that's been announced, but it wouldn't surprise me to see that announced in the coming days. And as we saw when suddenly the spotlight went on, say, RTE in the last year, a lot more stuff can kind of fall out. And it's about a culture, not only a culture inside some of these public sector bodies, but also a culture of the contractors that come along. And I don't want to talk about any specific contractor, but that see state contracts, and that possibly there's a higher price tag when it comes to certain state contracts.
Well, let's talk about that, because it all links in together. You said there will be no one accountable for what's going on with the OPW, and as we have seen, there has been no accountability for what's going on with the Children's Hospital. And the board says the National Children's Hospital was held hostage, and now we're talking about the June 2025 completion date slipping. We had Professor Paul Davis here with us the other day, a professor of procurement who went 2027, lads. I don't know what they're talking about. So the National Children's Hospital, they finally said, oh yeah, it mightn't be completed by then.
Yeah, they have. And of course, this is kind of, spending a taxpayer's money writ large, from 1.4 million on a hut to over 2 billion. 2.4 billion is what they're projecting could be the final price on the National Children's Hospital. And while there's been a lot of focus on the price, actually really the big issue is the completion date, because we're talking about, a national piece of infrastructure here for the treatment of sick children. And it will be incredible once it's done. But the further and further it's delayed, then these children aren't getting treated in this new state-of-the-art facility. More news coming out that there's further delays, accusations that the BAM are holding the state or the hospital itself
hostage. To your point about state contracts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And again, not being able to comment specifically on BAM, because there's a lot of back and forth and accusations flying each way, and a lot of very strong language being used. But certainly, this is another example of a state contract being apparently agreed on the basis of one price and one timeline, and both of those being blown out of the water over time. And this being on such an important piece of national infrastructure, and ahead of the government planning to spend a lot more money on a lot other big pieces of national infrastructure. So it just doesn't instill confidence, I think, in the public.
The only thing I'd say on BAM is, right, and they have strongly denied that all of the things that were made at the committee yesterday. The one thing I would say in BAM's defence is that this went to tender without a design. In the very first place. So they said, we're going to build a hospital for 650 million euro, but we don't really know what we want yet. We don't really know what it looks like. And as anyone who's done a house project knows, if you're getting an extension and then you decide, oh, actually, I'd like the marble in the kitchen instead, and actually I want 3 more plugs over there, and you keep adding things onto the design, of course it's going to add costs on. Now, the way it's ballooned and the way it's delayed has been ridiculous, and BAM is certainly partly at fault for that, and that's all being adjudicated by an independent adjudicator on the costs, which could add up to 750 million euro more, according to the committee yesterday, to the price tag that's already there. So the whole thing to be adjudicated on. Now, there's rows over that. There's basically an independent committee that looks at all the claims from BAM that the board are pushing back on and decides, yes, you get that. And some of them have been granted. They've said, that's extra work.
Send Tommy in. He's a $5 an hour. I'm sorry now. That's crazy.
So frustrating. It really is. And when you see this Apple tax windfall money coming in, can we really trust this government?
You'd be campaigning not for a metro right now.
Absolutely, just put it in the bank. Don't let them touch it the way they're spending it. Let us know, 0896 111. Like, does this make your blood boil? Because I can imagine there's so many people frustrated with this, and it will be interesting to see if they really do forensically go in and look at the spending. Quickly, we do have to touch on this for something completely different. Improper dishwashing loading is costing households 24 pounds in the UK annually. Are you
like say 24 billion there?
Loading of the dishwasher is wasting energy.
There you have it. Sean, dishwasher etiquette in your household?
I have to do it. I'm very religious about it. And if someone else packs the dishwasher, I will repack it to make sure it's done right and done the way that I want to do it. And it's very careful. You have to make room for the bowls. I hate it when I go to the dishwasher and someone has inefficiently used space. It's like Tetris. It needs to be done properly.
Exact same. See, like if the big plates are not on the outside, it wrecks my head.
I have a thing about not using it at all, actually. So me and my wife have disputes about this, but I try to wash everything in the sink because it's just the two of us in the house. There's the two kids as well. Luckily, they don't yet make too much of a mess with the dishes. But just two dishes, two knives and forks going into a dishwasher, and it sits there and goes stagnant over a number of days. So only if we have a number of people over, pack it up, then put it on. But otherwise,
live a little, Daniel.
You're the dishwasher person. You asked a very interesting question a few minutes ago.
Do you wash your dishes before you put them in?
Oh, no, the tablet.
Do you just lob the tablet in?
No,
or do you put it
who
into
does
the
that?
compartment?
No, I've
Who does
never.
this?
Can you just
Well,
lob it
my
in
wife
like a grenade?
lobs it in.
You can just lob it.
Absolutely. I mean, come on, it gets stuck under the rotor. Don't talk to me. Dishwashers cause many arguments in our house.
You
what
know
about
we
yours?
want the etiquette. You know we want to hear from you right now. 0896 111 111. I've never heard anyone firing in the dishwasher tablet.
Daniel Murray from the Business Post and Sean Defoe from News Talk. Great to have you both with us. Thanks so much.
I've never
for
seen
that,
Sean
guys.
so riled up. It's amazing. Lots more still to come on Ireland AM.
See you shortly.
Welcome back. Now, Ireland's upcoming ban on XL bully dogs, it's going to be introduced next week. It's on October the 1st, in a move that some pet owners are deeming way too controversial and too harsh.
Joining us to discuss this is Orla Murray from the Irish Kennel Club and Donna Lennox from Clever Pets Ireland. Good morning to you both. Thank you so much for coming in. So this is coming in from the 1st of October. Orla, can you explain to us briefly just what an XL bully dog is?
Okay. An XL bully is not a particular breed. It's basically a mix of breeds. So they're not registered with the Irish Kennel Club. So what they are is a type of breed. They're a breed that was bred for strength. They're a breed that was bred for size. And that kind of, that's the only thing that we can say about them is that they are a mix of a variety of breeds. American bully would be predominantly what
the American Staffordshire. They're big dogs. If anyone who's seen a dog in the real life.
Yes.
So this ban, it's been discussed, and we just want to be really cognizant here because people have died from attacks. By various dogs, but XL bully has definitely been in the headlines. Children have been attacked, and there are families who have been devastated by this. This XL bully ban, it has been brought in as a result of this. We're not the first to do it. It has happened in many countries around Europe, Donna. And in fact, Ireland and Finland are the only two countries in Europe that don't have a ban on a certain dog. So what do you make of this ban?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we know that these type of bans don't work. We know that from other countries. In the UK, they have been ahead of us in bringing in this ban. Previously, they had pit bulls banned. Now they're banning XL bullies. And unfortunately, the statistics show that that doesn't work. I mean, they've had more aggressive incidents by dogs in general since this ban has been introduced, even. So,
Should we be banning more dogs?
No. I mean, the problem is that banning particular breeds does not get to the root of the issue, which is really a very complex issue. Serious aggressive incidents is a very complex situation, and unfortunately a quick fix is not going to do it. I understand where the government is coming from in trying to reassure people that they're doing something about it, but there is lots that we can do that doesn't focus on specific breeds, because unfortunately there are so many breeds, and we ban XL bullies today. What are we banning tomorrow? And this is not the first time these sorts of incidents have happened. This has been happening in Ireland. This has been happening in other countries.
But what do you think that we should do? Because there has been horrific attacks.
Absolutely. And I think, we really need to honour victims of these serious incidents by looking for a real solution that's actually going to bring down aggressive dog incidents.
Give us an example.
So, well, for instance, in Canada, they have, the Calgary model, which is a multifaceted approach, and that has been shown to reduce serious dog aggression incidents.
But what does that mean?
That means is that they focus on education, they focus on responsible dog ownership through, penalties for particular dogs, as in individual dogs and owners, whose incidents have occurred.
I mean,
you know, there's a bigger
Donna.
onus.
Anybody who is purchasing or breeding an XL bully, you know, the responsibleness of that, you have to question why they're bringing a dog like that into their home. It doesn't matter what their temperament is. Like, we're seeing nobody wants to see a dog destroyed.
Absolutely.
Nobody here does. But at the same time, we're seeing the injuries that these dogs are having. We're seeing the strength of these dogs. And I know if I'm walking with my children in the park or I'm walking with my dog in the park and I see a dog like that, I'd be fearful.
They are quite intimidating looking, purely because of their size and their strength. I think we also need to clarify exactly what's going to happen. There seems to be a little bit of confusion. The government have not said that all these dogs need to be euthanised. So basically what will happen on the 1st of October, the new legislation will say that they can't be bred, they must be spayed and neutered, they can't be sold and they can't be rehomed. So basically anybody who owns an XL bully currently, they will then have to certify them as in from the 1st of February. And at least then the government and, you know, the population as a whole have a handle on exactly how many of these dogs are in the country and who has them.
They certify them with the local authority.
Yeah.
You are shaking your head here about that, Donna.
Yeah, because I mean, we're going to get probably the more responsible people certifying their dogs. Do you know, I mean, we have dog enforcement legislation in place, which isn't enforced, you know, so, I mean, we are going to get a lot of dogs registered. Then there may be a fear from owners that if they register their dog, you know, that potentially their dog will be targeted down the line.
But that's up to us to say right now. Please do register your dog.
Absolutely.
Nothing is going to happen. They have to be neutered, but register your dog with your local authority and it's fine.
But this is not the first time breeds have been identified as being problematic. We've had it in the past with Rotties, German Shepherds. You know, a couple of years back there was discussion about adding Huskies to the restricted breed list. That didn't happen, but that was following a spate of incidents. And unfortunately, whenever a breed gets popular, a lot of people have them and the numbers of the dogs go up. That means the concerning incidents go up because the sheer volume of dogs.
You're talking about bringing in education and classes, but for people who
and enforcement along with everything else.
So will there be enforcement? Are we going to see guards out there trying to police it?
Well, our understanding is currently that the dog wardens are being trained in identifying these XL bully type breeds.
Are there enough dog wardens?
That is the question. We don't know. We really don't know whether they'll be able to actually manage the situation as it is. But at least, I mean, the government have to do something. We can't allow this to continue. And at least by identifying, now, funnily enough, the UK government, what they've done is they've actually put together a breed standard because it's not a recognised breed.
Yeah.
There's currently no breed standard in place for this breed. So what the UK government has done is they have actually put a breed standard in place to aid the identification of these dogs. So that in itself, again, will hopefully give the powers to the dog wardens that they can actually identify.
Where are they coming from? Sorry.
They have been bred in Ireland. They've also, when this legislation was brought in the UK, some of these dogs came to Ireland because they obviously couldn't be rehomed in the UK. So we have had a bit of a backlash.
Can breeders be targeted?
Who are the breeders? I mean, in Ireland, we have a massive population of designer crossbred dogs anyway. Like the majority of my clients, sorry, not the majority of my clients, but the majority of the dogs that I see out in the population are designer crossbred dogs. They're not coming from responsible breeding establishments.
Should we ban designer crossbred dogs?
But again, where do you stop? I mean, where does it all stop? What we know is that bans don't work. So why do we keep going down a road that we know doesn't work? In the UK, they've now given the green light to a challenge in the High Court for the XL bully ban. So, I mean, they're in trouble in the UK with it. The other, you mentioned about, you know, dog wardens being trained to identify breeds. We know from history, we know from pit bull bans in America and the UK and everywhere else, it's very difficult to identify conclusively dogs because you have a lot of crossbreeding. And particularly with the types, the pit bulls and the bullies, because a lot of the time, well, I mean, for a lot of dogs, they're not being bred through anyway. But you have an awful lot of backyard breeding going on.
We'd love to hear from people. If you have a dog that's on the restricted dog list, we'll say like an Alsatian or a pit bull, how do you feel when you go out? How do you feel about this XL ban? Do you think they could come for your dog at some stage? 0896 111 111. Because with all of this, and you hear time and time again from dog experts, that it's not the dog, it's not the breed, it's the owner. And in this country, we are known throughout Europe as having horrendous puppy farms, and we have these all over the place. Every once in a while they come up on the news. We haven't really seen it in a while. This is true, isn't it, Orla? Like, there are puppy farms all over this place.
There are puppy farms all over the place. Funnily enough, the designer breeds is where they want to be, because if they have to register their puppies with the Irish Kennel Club, they're under very strict regulations as to how many litters they can be bred, how many times a bitch can be bred, how many litters. So these
like
designer
dogs are
breeds,
just being bred over and over. It's awful.
Yeah. So all we can ask is to ask people, if they are looking at buying a breed, to make sure and ensure that they go to a reputable breeder, that they see the mum, that they see the dad.
What does that mean? Does that mean that you know that she's not being bred, more than once every 2 years, every 3 years or something like that?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, if they have registered with the Irish Kennel Club, at least you know that there's regulations that the bitch can only have 4 litters, that she must be over the age of 18 months. There is currently restrictions. She can't be bred over the age of 7. So these guidelines are in place if they want to register with the Irish Kennel Club. So that is that's one area in which you can actually check if they're Irish Kennel Club registered. Okay. And then we also, if you go onto the Irish Kennel Club website, there is information for puppy buyers as to what to look out for, and it actually points out the red flags as well that you need to be looking out for.
I think you'll get a sense for it as well. Listen again, 0896 111. Do you want quickly?
Just one last thing. I think we're in danger of really moving things underground. We need to enable owners to recognise problematic behaviour in their dogs and get help with their dog's behaviour before we end up with more of these types of situations.
That's such a really important point. That is such a good point.
Donna Lennox from Clever Pets Ireland, thank you so much. And Orla Murray from the Irish Kennel.
Thank you
both so much. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, get in touch. 0896 111 111. That's more after the break.
Now, you may have heard of a WhatsApp scam that's doing the rounds at the minute, in which a scammer posing as seemingly a trusted contact asks you to send them a security code to your account.
Here to explain the scam and the measures we can take to avoid it is Irish Times technology correspondent Ciara O'Brien. Ciara, thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
What is this scam?
This is actually, it's an older scam, but it's resurged in the last few weeks. We actually wrote about it last year, and even at that point, it was an older scam. So what they do is scammers will take control of somebody else's WhatsApp and then send you a message to say, I've sent you a security code. Can you send it back to me? And because it comes from a trusted number, you think, OK, this is genuine.
This is a family or a friend or something that you think...
Work colleague, anybody. Could be anybody. But when you send that code back, what you're actually sending them is your WhatsApp security code. Because when you set up your WhatsApp account, you're sent a security code to verify that the number you are registering WhatsApp is actually yours. Because otherwise, you could just register anybody's number, right? So they send you this code, you put the code in, it activates WhatsApp on your phone. And the same thing happens then if you move phones. You get sent a security code to verify that you still own that number. Yeah. If you give that code to anybody else, they can then set up your WhatsApp on their phone and then lock you out of yours. They will have access to all your contacts that you have registered with WhatsApp. So all the contacts from your phone that are currently using WhatsApp will be kind of registered to your account. They will have access to that. So then they can repeat the scam on other people. What they won't have is access to your chats, because they are usually backed up, say, to your cloud.
So basically all they're getting is your numbers, your contact numbers. So what harm is that?
A lot, actually, because if you think of all the scams over the last couple of years where somebody has sent a message to someone saying, oh, I'm stuck, I need money. That comes from a trusted number. If you say, I'm stuck, I've no card, can you send this? Yes. Can you send me €50? Can you send me €100? Can you send me €1,000 to this number? Because I've also lost all of my bank cards and this person has let me use their account. It's very easily done. It could also mean that you inadvertently give away security information or logins, because somebody says, oh, I've lost the login for this account, can you send it to me? You think that it's a trusted person, so you send it. And then
So
it goes to a
if you
random
are
stranger.
getting this, then what do you do to avoid this?
So be suspicious at all times.
Yeah.
But we are,
that's my main
aren't
thing.
we? We are getting a lot
naturally,
better.
Which
like,
is,
I won't click on anything now that's sent to me. I won't click on anything.
But if you get a message from somebody that looks like a friend...
Like if Carl sent me a message and said, send me that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is, if you do get a message like this, say, to send a code, ring that person outside of WhatsApp. Because obviously, if somebody has taken over their account, first of all, they're not going to pick up the phone. This actually did happen to somebody I know. I got that message from them and immediately flagged it as massive scam, rang her outside of WhatsApp and she picked up the phone. But, if you were to messaging them back and forth, they're replying as if they are your friend. Second of all, and what everybody should do for every online account they have where it's available is implement two-factor authentication.
Okay.
Now, this is where you put a separate security code, separate to the one that WhatsApp will send you to activate your account.
I'll have a look at it here.
So
how do we do it then? So if
it's
I'm
in your settings.
it's in your settings.
Yeah. So you go into your settings, into your...
I see it there,
two-step verification. Pick a unique code, not one that you reuse everywhere, by the way. Pick a unique code, one that you'll remember, but it's hard to guess. And then every time you install WhatsApp, that WhatsApp number on a new phone, or somebody else tries to do it, they'll be asked for this code. You don't have that code, you don't get access. You can also set it as a security measure to periodically ask for it. So if you lose your phone, it doesn't mean that anybody can get into your WhatsApp. You'll have to put in a code every so often to actually get in there.
Yeah.
So it keeps people out. Look, it's just one more layer of security.
But it's the same for your Gmail, for all these things.
Everything,
you should have two-step authentication with everything.
You should.
You forget what you've put.
A lot of it will be Face ID now. A lot of it will be stored. It'll be stored with your thumb or your Face ID.
They're phasing out passwords for a lot of things and using passkeys, so you can use, say, your Face ID on your phone to log into another device.
Yeah, I have a lot of the thumb stuff on my phone now.
So that's the thing. We're not living in Mission Impossible. No, Ethan Hunt has taken your thumbprint. That's yours. So these are the things right now people should consider putting on two-step authentication.
On every single account that supports it.
Yeah.
And always make sure that those methods are up to date as well. So if you lose access to an email address, make sure that you update any of the two-factor authentication that you use that email address as a security method for. So if you have, say, a Gmail account and you have an old phone number, make sure that, when you change your phone number, that you update the phone number, or if you change a secondary email address, update that email address. And it's a good idea. I mean, they use code authenticators. We use them on a lot of accounts, say work-related accounts, where it generates a new code every time.
Yes.
So it's very hard to actually break it.
It is. I've locked myself out of my work email for like 6 months now because of that. So it's very handy.
So, Ciara, the one thing is, if you get that message, just ring the person and go, is this you?
Yeah, and I've had them myself, and some of them have been scams, some of them have been genuine. It takes 2 minutes to make a call, and it will save you an awful lot of stress, because once you're locked out of your WhatsApp, you can get back in, because obviously you can request that code, but there is usually a time period. You can't keep jumping from phone to phone. So you might be locked out for a couple of hours. And that an awful lot of damage can be done in those 2 hours.
Of course.
And it's embarrassing for people as well. People shouldn't be embarrassed, because scammers are getting more and more sophisticated, and every time we knock one down, another one pops up. You're playing whack-a-mole here. So people shouldn't be embarrassed by it, but people do get embarrassed by it.
And this one, it's an oldie but a goodie. It keeps on working. It's at the moment, so look out for that WhatsApp scan and be suspicious. Ciara O'Brien, Irish Times technology correspondent, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, still to come this morning, we're going to be chatting to Brian Lloyd. He's going to be giving us his take on Saoirse Ronan's latest release and her Scottish accent.
Yes, and Cork comedian Andrew Ryan will be joining us for a much needed laugh.
Oh, okay.
We'll see in a few minutes.
Hello, welcome back to IrelandAM. Here's what we've got to come for the rest of the show.
Coming up at 8:45, Cork comedian Andrew Ryan is going to be here. He's going to tell us how he blagged his way onto stage with Picture This.
Oh, Jenny, now former rugby international Gordon Darcy tells us why he's dipping his oar, that sounds wrong, dipping his oar into the world of rowing. That's coming up at 9:20 this morning.
Uh-huh.
We're going to be turning to the experts to get advice on the ultimate parenting dilemma. fussy eating, I'm sure, drives lots of parents wild at home. Oh God, it's so frustrating. If you have stories on how to tackle your little one's picky eating habits, send them in to us, 0896 111 111.
Alan is getting the lowdown. He's dipping his oar into the movies. Is that what's happening this weekend?
We're dipping all over the shop
Dipping
this morning. Yeah,
Alan.
we're dipping everywhere. Brian Lloyd is here and he's going to rate this week. We're going to talk about two big Irish stars, Saoirse Ronan and Colin Farrell.
Yeah, so there are two different things going on. Saoirse Ronan is in this new movie called The Outrun, which you can see right there. She plays this alcoholic that returns to the Orkney Islands and is trying to kind of get her life back into action. And then Colin Farrell is playing the Penguin. This is the new spin-off TV series from the Batman.
He just looks amazing.
He does. He looks completely different. He looks like he's got like the bodysuit on and then the makeup, and he looks completely different.
But you said he reminds you of who?
Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't hang me out, man. Don't do it.
Right, tell us more.
I won't tell you.
Don't do it, man.
Okay, no, that's all that sorted. And of course, Edward Hayden is going to be in the kitchen a little later on with his take on custard slice recipe.
It's time now to take a look at this morning's papers. We'll start with the Irish Times, the headline there. Varadkar calls for pledge on Irish unity. He goes on to say every party running in the next Dáil elections should make a manifesto pledges that Irish unification is, quote, an objective, not an aspiration, and back the establishment of a new Ireland forum to plan for it.
Mortgage price war on cards as AIB cuts fixed rates again. The banking group is reducing one of its key green rates and its 4-year fixed rate by 0.25 percentage points each. That's the front page of the Irish Independent.
The Examiner's front page, BAM clash with Hospital Board on delays after 7 years. 14 delays in completion dates and a cost that could rise even higher than the €2.2 billion spent already. There is still no guarantee children will be receiving treatment in the new National Children's Hospital by 2026.
The Sun leads with another kick in the huts. It continues, stating a government security hut that cost over €1.4 million has been described as value for money. That's according to the Office of Public Works, which also spent €336,000 on a bike shed.
I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that the Herald, the Mirror and the Daily Mail all led with that same story.
And finally, the Star goes with a slightly different take on that story. Its headline, Tango and Cash. It goes on to describe the Department of Finance security hut as having a roof like Donald Trump's hairstyle. Taoiseach Micheál Martin has branded the €1.4 million expenditure as ridiculous.
I can't unsee it.
And listen, we have a load of text coming in that, but everyone's just fed up.
Isn't it true? Isn't it true that they say a week is a long time in politics? Because only last week we had the poll.
Oh, they were riding high.
And they were literally going, oh, Fine Gael, they could just nearly do it themselves. And then this week, everybody's just going, oh my God, get your act together.
I'd be really interested to see if a big review of spending does happen, like what we saw happen in RTE.
They have to.
Because if that's what they think is value for money in the Office of Public Works, what else are they spending? Anyway, we were talking about a number of other different things as well, which got people really interested in. We were talking about the ban on XL bully dogs. It's coming in on the 1st of October. Michael said, in my opinion, these dogs are dangerous. We are all aware of tragic past incidents. They seem to be bred for strength, size, aggressiveness, and in most cases, an intimidation tactic for the owners.
Whereas Julie goes on to say, not everyone that wants an XL bully dog wants them for a status symbol. If bred and raised right, they are great, friendly dogs. The government needs to look at unscrupulous breeders and those people pumping dogs up with steroids and wanting them aggressive. Dog bans do not work.
Do people pump their dogs with steroids?
There's dogs.
Well, listen, who knows about that? But at the same time, yes, they absolutely should be going after the breeders. But why would you get an XL bully dog? There's lots of dogs out there that are great, friendly dogs. You don't have to go get an XL bully.
They're actually putting a ban in Holland on dogs like pugs and stuff, breeding those.
Because they can't breed.
Because they can't breed.
The crossbreeding is not healthy.
So they're kind of, and cats as well who have flat faces.
Not
like,
a fan
you can't
of
do
it
this
at
anymore.
all.
We were also talking about dishwasher stacking.
Yes.
And how you stack your dishwasher. Is there a right way? Is there a wrong way?
Well, it turns out it could cost you an extra €24 if you stack it the wrong way.
A year now.
Well,
Still, are we always thinking about it?
Every little helps, Alan.
That's true. But Patricia says, I don't understand this. My 3 boys are left-handed, so they load their plates and bowls backwards in the dishwasher. It drives me crazy.
It's
so
backwards
if you're
to Patricia.
So if
it's
you're
back to
putting
front.
Yeah.
Well, do you know the way? Because they all go at this angle.
So
and then
they're putting them in that way,
inside.
and she goes, "No, they should be turned around."
Anyway,
Easier for her to take out.
it's so frustrating. I'm a bit like that. I get frustrated whenever it's not stacked right.
Why?
I don't know. I don't know. And it's not like me to be particular about this sort of stuff, to be honest with you.
Are you a lobber?
No. I'm put it into the little
We
compartment.
were
lobbed
talking
a few
about where
times
you
in
put
his
the
life.
tablet as well, and you lobber in. I love the one that's
Maren just thinks lob and the gob as soon as she hears that. I don't know why. Huh? Back in the day, Maren.
Lob the gob.
But my wife, I said, yeah, she just gets the tablet and just
lobs
it in.
But Martin's very good at, you can't just lob the dishwasher tablet in.
Thank you, Martin.
Because why? Now, this is it has a rinse cycle first that empties the dirty water, then fresh water comes in, gets to a certain temperature, and that's when the tablet pops out of the little thing. But surely then, if it's the raising the temperature of the water,
it wouldn't pop anyway.
Yeah, that disintegrates
I
that.
have another one for you as well. Like if there's
here
a
we
load
go.
of butter on the knife, butter or peanut butter on the knife, like
Yeah.
do you rinse that off? Do you pour it
You
before you
should
put it into...
really, shouldn't you?
Yeah, because it doesn't
Okay,
melt
I think
off
this is
properly.
a therapy session for Tommy right now. And Lucy is a
We've actually loads on dishwasher.
If you
and
know
how
my
you
wife,
stack your
don't tell her
dishwasher.
I slagged her off.
just about to say, you're really getting it all out there now.
Yes,
I
very,
love it.
very interesting. All right,
I keep
text
those messages
on
coming
that.
in to us. So you can WhatsApp us 0896 111 about your...
Yes, after the
your
break,
lobbing.
we are going to be learning all about Colin Farrell's take on one of the movie's most dastardly villains, the Penguin.
Quack, quack. See you back here very shortly.
You're very welcome. Quack, quack. You'll get it in a minute. Saoirse Ronan's latest release is already receiving Oscar buzz, while Colin Farrell waddles in, quacking as Batman's arch nemesis, the Penguin.
What's the sound of a penguin?
Is it Pingu?
Brian Lloyd
Not
is here.
quack,
Hello.
anyway.
They go "Wah," like that.
Do they?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
You think I've watched
March
that?
of the Penguins, never watch it?
Yeah.
Oh no.
I remember the Guinness ad with the, remember the pup, 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 and they go.
We can definitely
Okay.
believe that. Right, let's talk Saoirse Ronan
Okay,
and
let's-
Oscar buzz.
Move on. Quack, quack. The Outrun.
The Outrun, yes. So this is based on the sort of memoir of the same name. Saoirse Ronan plays a woman who returns to the Orkney Islands after dealing with alcoholism and drug abuse in London. She arrives home. Her father, played by Stephen Delan, is also an alcoholic, but he's also schizophrenic and bipolar. Her mother, Saskia Reeves, who people would know from Slow Horses, she's now an evangelical Christian. There's a lot of tension between her two parents, but also between her and her parents, and she's trying to kind of maintain her sobriety while reconnecting with nature and trying to find herself on the Orkney Islands.
Oh, there's a lot going on there. Let's take a look at The Outrun.
I'm sorry. I can't hear you say that again. I wish you were a completely different person.
The urge to drink can come out of nowhere. You think you're doing well. Suddenly you want nothing more than a drink.
How does London compare to Poppy?
A bit more going on, I guess.
So how long do you think you'll stay here for?
I have a life that I have to get back to.
How's Mum?
She offered to put me into her prayers. I'm scared. I miss it. I miss how good it made me feel.
Yeah.
Okay, so already the Oscar buzz
Yeah.
in relation to this, because it's hitting all the Oscar.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, but not in that kind of like
checkpoints.
Oscar baity kind of way. Like, I mean, it is a very like strong character drama. You can tell that she's put a lot of work into it. I would say it's very authentic to the experience of addiction and the experience of like having parents that have kind of, diametrically opposed approaches to dealing with addiction and stuff like that. Her accent is great. I mean, you can tell she was getting lessons off the hubby.
Yeah.
And just even the kind of the setting of it, like the Orkney Islands, like it's really beautiful. It really is cinematic. That kind of connection between, the inner turmoil and like, the wild nature around her is a big thing.
Go on, what do you give it?
It's good. No, I enjoyed it. It's like 3.5 out of 5. Like, I think the story is a little bit weak in terms of like it doesn't really go anywhere. It just kind of sort of peters out. It's just her
Okay.
kind of going through the process. But she's brilliant in it, so you're going to see
To
her.
see her
Yes.
be fantastic
Exactly.
and embody another character. She's fantastic. That is out Friday the 27th, The Outrun. She's just phenomenal.
Let's move on to the next one. This is going to be a Netflix coming out 27th. What date's that? A couple of days. With Will Ferrell and Harper Steele. Will and Harper.
Will and Harper, yes. So this is a documentary. This is about Will Ferrell and a friend of his, Harper Steele, who has transitioned from a man to a woman at the age of 61. Previously, she was the head writer on SNL. The two of them met there on the same day, have been working together for years. Will Ferrell decides to accompany Harper Steele on this like 17-day road trip across America. Previously, Harper Steele had gone out on these kind of wanderings, if you know, the kind of real sort of Americana thing. And Will Ferrell decides to join her on this one because this is her first time doing this now as a trans woman.
Let's take a quick look.
I love this country so much, I just don't know if it loves me back right now.
Harper, would you want to do a road trip as this new version of yourself and at the same time figure out what this all means to us?
You recognize this guy? This is a Hollywood movie star.
No. No? You don't recognize okay. That's okay. Roll up the window.
Were you a little worried about how to talk to me when I came out to you?
Yeah, probably a little nervous.
There are no ground rules with friends, I'm telling you.
There's a question. Do you think you're a worse driver as a female driver?
That's a good dig. That's a good dig.
Oh,
that's
it's
a good
so
dig.
good. They have been on the promo trail.
Yeah.
And there is something about everyone looking at Frank the Tank.
Yeah.
And his gorgeous relationship with
Old school. Nice.
Old
nice
school,
one,
yeah. Looking at him and his gorgeous relationship with his friend.
Yeah.
And realising that she is trans.
Yeah.
It really does open this out, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Like you were kind of saying it as we were watching, like it opens the conversation up. And that's really what this whole thing is about, is essentially them going on a road trip. And you know what it's like when you're on a long road trip. You're kind of talking about anything and everything, and you're just kind of, the conversation is flowing. And, you know, like Harper is very much like, you can ask me anything. There are no bounds to this, and we can go anywhere, we can get weird with it. And the two of them have been friends for so long that he's like, okay, so what actually happened? When did you decide to do this? Were you always like this? Did you always feel weird about it? And then as they're going through it, you know, like there's one scene in it where Harper decides to go into this country bar and she says to Will, like, look, just stay outside. I want to just kind of feel it out. And you go in and you think initially, oh God, this is going to get really bad because there's like F Biden signs up on the wall and stuff. But then it turns into this kind of beautiful moment of like self-acceptance, and it's just, it's really heartwarming. I know that kind of seems kind of cheesy and stuff, but it is. It's a really heartwarming documentary.
On a big topic of conversation that people kind of feel you're walking on eggshells.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
And I just like, even that joke about the drive, and
exactly.
You know, it's the sort of thing you would never want to make that in case you upset somebody, but actually they're doing this and open up the conversation, and I'd say it's going to be really enlightening.
Yeah, definitely.
And, as well. But actually from a funny side as well.
Exactly, from funny, and the fact that it's non-judgmental, that it's like, there are no off-topic questions here, and you can just really kind of...
But people are different when they're with a person rather than online on a keyboard. It's so much nicer. I mean, what are you going to give this?
Like 4 out of 5. This is really, really worth watching. It's gorgeous. I would not be surprised if this actually ended up in the Oscars as well.
Okay, so this is a Netflix documentary, 27th of September.
Will and Harper, there you go. Right, let's move on to Quack Quack, Colin Farrell in The Penguin.
Yeah, so Colin Farrell is playing the Penguin, reprising the role that he had in The Batman. This is set like a week after the events of The Batman. It's about the Penguin trying to kind of corner the drug trade in Gotham. While he's doing that, the daughter of Carmine Falcone, Sophia Falcone, played by Christian Milotti, comes back into the thing. She is a serial killer who's been locked up in Arkham Asylum throughout most of her life, and now she's trying to kind of wrest control of the crime empire back from the Penguin. So the two of them are mixing
We're really
up.
Going into the Batman lore here.
Oh,
with
yeah,
this
it's
one.
really deep and dark.
This is a television show. It's going to be on Sky Atlantic and Now TV. Let's take a look at The Penguin.
Come on. You gotta help me up. Life is just a dream. You promised me, Oswald. I know, Ma. I deserve a better life. I'm working on it. The world ain't set up for the honest man to succeed. That should be the American dream right there. You know, beautiful story with a happy ending. But that ain't the way the world works. America's a hustle.
Yeah. So when does Colin Farrell come into it?
Hey! No, but he really does. Like, That's always been the thing about Colin Farrell, is that he is like a character actor trapped in a leading man's body, like that he needs like literally to put on an entire prosthetic and a fat suit just to drop his good looks and play these kind of roles, like, and he's brilliant in it. Like, you can tell that he is just enjoying every minute of it. I would say though, the secret weapon in this is Christian Milotti, who plays Sophia Falcone. She is terrifying in this.
Right, because she was like the mom in How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah, and she was in, like, you know, second season of Fargo, Palm Springs, when we were talking about. She had like a small role in The Sopranos as well. Like, she's been around. Yeah. But this is going to be, I think, her breakout like performance in this. It is fantastic. She's brilliant in it. Definitely worth a watch.
Really like it. What are you giving it?
3.5,
4
out of 5. Oh, looking forward to seeing that. Okay, finally, it's another Netflix documentary, Mr. McMahon, for WWE fans.
Mr. McMahon, yeah. So he was the owner of the WWE. This is a 6-part documentary series. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Vince McMahon has been accused of sexual assault, sex trafficking, just really, really, really dark allegations. These interviews took place literally like days, weeks before these allegations actually came out. Now, he has come out and since said that this documentary is, you know, deceptive and paints him in a completely different light.
So hold on, he's not. It's not like the Beckhams. He's not in control of this documentary. No. It is an independent documentary.
It was an independent documentary, and it was done by the people who did Tiger King. So there is that element of like, yeah, there's hard journalism going on here, but there is that also kind of.
Why did he do it?
Do what exactly?
The documentary.
It's kind of because he's very.
He's mega minted.
Oh yeah, no, he didn't need to do this at all. No. This was sort of meant to be his kind of like victory lap, but also him kind of laying bare the kind of warts and all the story. It kind of him controlling the narrative, but of course, as we found out, he doesn't control the narrative. It's brilliant. I would say for wrestling fans, there's nothing in this that they wouldn't already know, because wrestling, as you know, is a very, very dark, seedy industry. But for people who have even a passing interest to watch it in the 90s or the 2000s, this is worth a watch because
what do you give it?
It's brilliant. Like, it's really, really dark, like 3.5, 4 out of 5. Like, it's definitely worth a watch. Yeah, really interesting.
It's an awful lot. Well, the crappy weather's here.
Yeah, that's it. This is why they do it. They like front load it for crap weather. Like,
so good, Brian Lloyd. As always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you again very soon.
Some
Cheers.
great ones. Which one did you watch there?
I think I'm going to go straight for the Penguin.
The Penguin.
The Penguin.
Quack.
Still to come, Cork comedian Andrew Ryan tells us some tidbits from his tour.
And Edward Hayden's in the kitchen. Looking forward to that. See you shortly.
Now, we are starting the day on a sugar high, and yes, I'll have some tea,
There can only be one man. Bring in the teapot.
Oh, yeah, Edward Hayden is here, showing us the secret of his custard slice.
Yeah, listen, I just thought the weather was going to be so bad this week that we needed something Moorish, and this is certainly Moorish yet light at the same time. So it's really, really delicious, and people will be glad to hear it's really, really simple.
OK.
So I'm going to
make it. Could I even make it?
Absolutely, Alan, I actually think you could.
All right.
Actually, there you have it. There is hostage to fortune for you.
I'd be very popular at home if I could make this.
Well, Tommy, listen, what it is, it's low effort, but it's maximum impact, OK? Because it's a real kind of a showstopper. Now, it's very simple. So what I've got is I've just got a roll of the puff pastry. So just unroll the puff pastry.
So you're not making your own?
Not making my own, absolutely.
So that's fairness. That's why you're saying it's so easy.
It's very simple.
So you go in, you buy your puff pastry.
You get your convenience puff pastry. OK, open it out. Just make sure that's not stuck to the parchment. And then just pop it over on the other side, maybe, just to make sure.
Can you get different grades of puff pastry?
Again, the one that you get mainly is the butter one. You know, again, what I would say to people when they're buying it, there's two ways you can buy it. You can buy it as I did, where it's in that kind of a cylindrical roll, or you can buy it in a block, like a pound of butter, and roll it yourself. The beauty of this is that it has been commercially rolled, so it all is going to be the same length.
Great.
Now, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to just cut that in half. So again, you could use a ruler, or what I'm just going to do is just put one on top of the other, and if there has been a little bit of a discrepancy, you can just get rid of that.
And why is it very important that it's the exact same?
Oh, precision is key in everything, Alan. In everything, precision is key. Now, then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a fork, OK? Or again, people who are doing a lot of baking might have like a pastry docker. But again, I'm happy just to use the fork. And what you're going to do is you're just going to prick the pastry all over, and that will just prevent it from, you know, rising, you know, really, really dramatically. OK, with puff
pastry docker. Do you have a pastry docker?
Oh, I'd say he has.
No, I do not.
Yeah. There's anyone listening now
fork.
that can send you something in for Christmas.
I have a fork, now, Christmas present.
There we have it. So I've just docked the pastry just like so, not overly, but just kind of put plenty of little bits on that. Then in here what I've got is I've got a mixture of egg and milk. So I've just got 1 egg with just a spoon of milk or so, just to make up a lovely little egg wash. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is I'm just going to brush that over the top of the pastry. And again, no more than the ladies with the fake tan, just make sure that you get every little bit, okay?
Sorry,
you need to get every little bit.
Sorry to ask, but do you need to have milk in it, or is egg on its own all right?
You need to have the milk in it. I'll tell you why, Tommy, because the egg on its own just ends up being a little bit thick. So I just want to have it. You see where I'm painting it on there? But I don't really want any little bits of, like, egg stuck on top of it. So the egg with the milk just makes it that little lighter or looser. Again, if you didn't have milk, throw a bit of water or something into it just to lighten it. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pop that on to my tray, just like so. I might squash the second one on there as well. Okay, so pop the 2 on the 1, and then into the oven, 180, 350, gas mark 4, and we're going to bake that for about, 18 minutes or thereabout until it's nice and crisp. Okay?
So you'll see it, though.
You'll see it, yeah, absolutely. You'll see it rise.
This is never going to be raw or anything
mixture,
like that.
never going to be raw.
Yeah.
But again, of course, puff pastry when it's baked should have that lovely layered effect.
Yeah, look
so
at that.
there is the resultant mixture. Then over here, what I have, it's very, very simple now. What I've got is I've just got some whipped cream. I'm just going to stiffen that up a wee little bit. Okay, so I've got some of that whipped cream, and to that I'm going to add some of the Irish yoghurt Clonakilty. Now this is gorgeous. This is a custard-style yoghurt, okay? So it's like a custard-flavoured yoghurt. So it's absolutely delicious, obviously on its own or with a granola or something with that lovely custard flavour. Or what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add that in to the cream.
That'd be perfect for you, Al. You always love your custard.
Yeah, well, the custard
saying you need more yoghurt.
So give that a little mix.
I'm thinking about my gut health.
Well, listen, Alan, you'll be lepping out of your skin after this morning. Absolutely. Lepping out of it. Now, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to
whipped cream did you put in that?
Now, I had about 9 fluid ounces. I just have a bit extra this morning because I know that when the cameras stop rolling, I'll have a big family to feed.
Now, why did you put a dab of cream there?
Just to keep it in position. I put a bit of cream on.
See, I thought that's. I would have said that was upside down. I would have put it the other way.
No, I'm going to put it nicely because I want to have it nice and flat, you see, Alan. So I want to have it nice and flat. There I've got my cream. I've also got then a little bit of fresh fruit. So whatever type of fresh fruit that you want. And again, of course, when we see fruit on top of anything, doesn't it always look really nice and healthy? And I'll just take a little bit of strawberry. I worked with a lady years ago and she used to always tell me that fruit sells. So at the end of the day, we used to put a bit of fruit on top of all the desserts. And as sure as God made apples, by the end of business, they'd be gone.
People would go, oh, that looks lovely.
Now, in on top of that, I'm going to put my other layer of pastry. And then what I have, I just have a little bit of boiling water here just to keep it nice and hot. What I'm going to do is... I just had some boiling water. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mix together some boiling water and some icing sugar. And I'm going to make what's known as a water icing or a glacé icing. Okay, and I'm just going to drizzle that on the top. So again, what you're doing is you're just adding the water very sparingly with some icing sugar. But again, correct it if you go wrong. You know, it doesn't matter. It's not a deal breaker. If you go too thin, just add another little bit. If it's too thick, just a really nice glacé icing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ad hoc drizzle that like a kind of, you'd do with a lemon drizzle. I'm going to do that over the top, and that just gives it a lovely little bit of sweetness. And then he's left me a few. I have some of the toasted almonds that are hot from the oven.
See, now, I wouldn't do the toasted almonds. That's ruining it.
Yeah, and again...
Put more on.
Well, when you were making yours this evening, you can leave the almonds off. But a little bit of fresh fruit on the top, just like so. Just push it.
Yeah, as you said, it's so simple.
It's so simple, but it is minimum. Remember what I told you? It's minimum effort and maximum impact. Little bit of icing sugar over the top, and a lovely platter, a pot of tea, and there you go.
So all that is cream, the yoghurt, custard, and the pastry.
It's the pastry, yeah. So have a little bit of that, and then
what I'm the corners?
Yeah.
And then the lovely icing on the top, Alan. And then what I would do with it, you have some of this cream infused with the
The custard.
Clonakilty, Irish yoghurt, Clonakilty, custard flavoured yoghurt, and another little bit of that on top. And as I said, very simple, very Moorish. But I think, you know, if you're looking for something to get out of jail free, if you have visitors coming at the last minute, it's just a showstopper in the centrepiece.
And remind me of the ones you can buy in the shops. Like, you know, they're just lovely.
But better.
But better. Much better. Edward, always a pleasure. That is delicious. Now, look, have you put that up for people like that?
And a lovely platter. Get a nice long platter. Go into the press, take out the plate that you have the turkey on for Christmas or something like that if you don't have one like mine.
All right.
But again, the nice plate just makes it.
Edward, it's gorgeous. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Now, Cork comedian Andrew Ryan will be with us next. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back. Now, our next guest has toured with the likes of Jason Manford and Joe Lycett, and his comedy chops have garnered him a cult following.
Comedy chops. Joining us now is comedian Andrew Ryan. But first, let's take a look at him taking some comedic inspiration from the iconic Corkonian pride.
La Rochelle is managed by a guy called Ronan O'Gara, who's from Cork, right? So the match is in France. The Irish TV, RT are covering the match, and they turn up and they see three fellas arriving into the ground. And your man goes up to them and goes, "What do you do, Harry?" You're like, "We're from Cork." This is what we do, like. Yeah, but your team is Munster, your team isn't in the final. But yeah, but we're from Cork, like. Ronan, the manager, he's from Cork, so we're here. He's from Cork, we're from Cork, let's be here. So your man goes, "So you know Ronan, do you? You're friends with Ronan?" "No, never met him before." So I said, "Hold on a second, you've flown from Ireland to France in a cost of living crisis to watch two rugby teams, neither of which you support, to support a man you've never met. We're from Cork, that's right."
Cork support their own.
We're from Cork. That's what you got to do. Hello, how are you?
Good to be back. Nice to see you.
That's 100% true, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it happened, a couple of years ago in a match,
Yeah.
But, so I think it's the Irish way of doing things abroad, you know, people are very good.
You got to support those things. Speaking of doing things abroad, you got engaged abroad on holiday, was it?
I did, I got engaged.
Hugh Grant levels of romance, was it?
That was the most awkward thing I've ever done in my life.
Why?
Well, I didn't have a ring.
Oh, okay.
So I went to the shop and bought a ring. Right.
Good plan.
So we were in Spain, we were in Malaga, and we were doing a bit of shopping. And I said, "You go off and do your thing now. You go off and do the girl thing, and I'll go." And I went and I went and I got a ring, and so then I rang her parents and I said, "Listen."
A joke ring or a real ring?
I know it was a real ring. It was a couple of hundred. Like that was the ring to get me to the next ring.
Gotcha.
Like.
Yeah. The promise ring. Yeah.
And then I rang her parents and I just said, "This is happening. You're happy with this?" Didn't give them much of an option, really. Like, and then the following day, she went out to the balcony, you know, to do the holiday pictures. You know, you do like fit check and all that kind of stuff.
We do love a balcony pic on holiday.
And then I went out. I was in my sliders. I'd hid the ring in a sock. I had it in like the box in a sock, and then I went out, and then I slipped. And then so I went down on one knee. I was in there on two knees, and I didn't make any eye contact. And I just went, "Listen, what's the crack? Are we doing this or what?" Because my left knee was really hurt. So then I had to get up, and then I was limping for the rest of the night. Like, so it was the most awkward thing that's ever happened.
That is the most awkward.
You didn't make any eye contact with that gorgeous woman right there.
Oh, I'm telling you, I swear to God, it is so odd. To be proposed to is to be the proposer. It is so awkward. Because you're like, I know she was going to say yes, but it was just like, I had this thing spent, "You are my best friend. I can't wait to be with you." And then I was just sitting there going, "What's
Are we doing this?
I actually said, "What's the crack?"
Oh, Jesus. Julie, you lucky thing.
Julie,
look, you got the shot.
So,
you got the shot.
I mean, when you were going to Spain, did you have this in your mind?
No,
say if there wasn't a jewellery shop that could have a ring.
What happened was we were in Donegal about 3 weeks before, and I thought I was going to do it at some point, but because I was going on tour in September, I'd no free weekends for 5 months.
Oh, right.
And I thought if we're going to propose to her, I want to have a bit of time off to celebrate it.
Yeah.
So the only time was going to be in the summertime. So we went to Donegal, and I was like, "Well, I didn't actually plan a ring." So I thought, we can't do that. The ring is an issue.
It is an issue.
The ring is a bit of an issue.
It is a bit of an issue. Yeah.
You can't just WhatsApp him.
No, I picture an emoji of a ring. No, that's not the thing.
I kind of forgot the fundamentals, the basics.
Like. But you're bringing the communities together. Catholic and Protestant.
Oh, I should get a grant.
Is that what you think?
I should get a grant.
You're living up in Belfast, obviously, so this is what you're doing.
Yeah. So
forging Ireland's future.
So Irish side, British side coming together, getting married in South Armagh, of all places.
There you go.
It's going to be totally fine.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. We've planned the wedding now. It's all booked. And we booked it all in 1 week. We did it. We've done it very unconventional. We're doing no bridesmaids, no groomspeople.
Okay.
Humanist, 15 minutes, job done. So what we did was we wrote down on the list of all the people we should invite.
Yeah.
And then we wrote down all the people that we want to invite, and that's been halved. So we've got rid of a load
of people.
Well, you know the way...
Is this on the should list? It's been half.
So you know the should list is like, oh, you need to invite Uncle John.
Yeah.
Because he was...
That you haven't seen in 2 years.
I haven't seen until a funeral.
Yeah.
Right? So we said, well, listen, so what... I'm not doing that. So what we did was we said, get your WhatsApp up. Who have we spoken to in the last 2 months that are part of our life? And if you're not in the last 2 months of the WhatsApp, you ain't going.
I think that is absolutely...
brilliant.
That is what you make of that. 0896 111 111. IrelandAM would be in everyone's WhatsApp. Would be at all the weddings.
We're not doing a wedding cake. There's no best man. There's no groomsman. It's 2 o'clock ceremony. Me and Julie will have breakfast that morning together. There's great entertainment. It's all about the people.
All about the people.
So, and the entertainment. Are Picture This invited to perform?
I'm seeing Ryan Hennessy from Picture This next week in Paris, a couple of weeks in Paris.
Oh, there you go.
And I'm going to approach the subject very cautiously because we're BFFs. To be honest with you, he's a bit of a baby reindeer. He keeps contacting me.
Tell us how you blagged to get on stage with...
So
it'd be great if they performed at the wedding, wouldn't it?
It would be great, yeah. So if you're listening to this, Ryan... DM me your quote.
Let me know.
So anyway, they Picture This came in to promote their new album on the radio show that I host, Q Radio in the North, and they were doing an acoustic set and they needed somebody to play a shaker. So I went, I'll do the shaker. So I'm just there, just shaking this shaker thing. And then I just said, oh, I'm now an official member of Picture This. And then he said, do you want to join us on stage in Belsonic?
Belsonic.
20,000 people. So I turned up.
So you were official shaker number one.
Exactly. I went on stage with them. Got a text off Ryan, got a WhatsApp off Ryan 2 days before I'm going, this is on for Saturday. I arrived at the gig. No one spoke to me. No one knew where I was. There was no phone signal because there's so many people there.
Yeah.
But I was in the Magner's tent and this guy just arrives out and he goes, I need you. And I go backstage and they give me the shake and he goes, you're coming on song number 14. So it's song number 12, so you stand here, someone will come and get you. So, no, listen, I had a few 7-Ups.
I could imagine.
A few 7-Ups, right? And I walked on, and then after about 30 seconds of the song, I got a bit, you know the way you go, sure, I'll go to the front.
I'll
go to the front. And then afterwards, me and Ryan, they were like, yeah, that was brilliant. And I was like, great. And then, so Ryan came on my podcast, and then there was a gang of us going to see them in Paris, just as a bit of crack.
You're just going to have to ask him.
But he's a lovely fella, like,
that would be
great band.
absolutely amazing.
Love it.
Now, obviously, like that, you were in 20,000 people and they managed to find who you are, and you have found that you're going to know someone wherever you are. We have to play this iconic clip from Andrew Ryan at a comedy gig.
You from Cork? Yeah. Oh, so am I. Whereabouts in Cork are you from? Oh, I'm from Carrickline. Are you? Yeah, what's your surname? This is the most Irish conversation I've had. Listen, just talk amongst yourselves there. I'm catching up with the cousin here, aren't I? So what's your surname? Is your auntie Deirdre Clune? Yeah, I knew it!
I know there's an Irish.
I have watched that so many times.
14 million hits.
No, watching that.
14 million.
I'm sorry, but that's all real.
All real, yeah, it just happens straight up. Yeah.
Straight up, how are you doing?
There was a bit more to it as well, because we were talking about the leaving and what year she did the leaving and stuff like that. But I thought, like, sometimes short, less is more, you know what I mean? It's more of an impact. But I remember just cutting it, going, oh, this was a bit of crack. And then I put it up at like 10 o'clock at night, and the whole of America had seen it.
It's just incredible.
14 million. It still goes, still going.
It's still brilliant.
Going.
I love it.
You were talking that you didn't have a weekend off because why? You're on tour.
I'm on tour. I'm on tour. Just extended the tour now to March.
Yeah, next March.
Next March, yeah.
Wow.
So tomorrow I'm in Leicester in England, then Manchester on Saturday. So I do the tour Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights.
Oh, yeah,
I do the radio Monday to Thursday.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I'm on tour and it's been brilliant. 9 shows in now, so it's great.
But you're doing a big charity gig for Cork.
So, for the whole of Cork.
For the whole of Cork.
The whole county needs help.
Everybody can go.
Ronan O'Gara needs a bit of help.
No. So Cork City Football Club, my nephew's in the academy in Cork City.
Yeah.
And he's had a great opportunity since he's been in there. And all the boys and girls academy teams, we're doing a big show at the Everyman to raise money at the end of October for the girls and boys academy teams. My nephew's had opportunities to go over to play against Manchester United, Manchester City. He's going over to play against Liverpool and Preston soon. He's played. And we want to do a big show at the Everyman Palace on the 31st of October.
31st of October. Yeah.
To raise money so that these young kids, you know, that they get the same opportunity so they stay involved in sport, because we know young women leave sport very early.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of that we want to say, like, to to get these kids to stay involved in sport. They get great support off the academy and stuff like that. So we've put together an unbelievable...
Chris Kent, Emma Doran, yourself.
Shane Todd. John Cleary. There's no better lineup in the UK and Ireland that night than that. And we highly recommend anyone in Cork just to come to have a great night.
Just Cork?
No, just Cork.
Just Cork. Don't drive.
We just want Cork now.
We just want Cork.
We don't want anyone else.
That's the 31st of October.
In the Everyman.
In the Everyman. That's
Cork City
charity
Football
night
Club.
for Cork
it's
City
great
Football
for the
Club.
academy teams, for the boys and girls academy teams.
And regardless of where you're from, you can go to his tour. Even if you're not from Cork, you can find out more on Andrew Ryan Comedy on your website there. Andrew, a pleasure. Deirdre Clune. Lovely to, if you're watching this morning, hello. Hopefully
I think it's tortured her, to be honest with you. I have her family, but they have blocked me on social media.
It's over.
And picture this, have just phoned us and said no to the wedding.
Okay. Well, I'm now not leaving this sofa. So
Tommy will do your wedding. Tommy will be at your wedding. We'll be back with you in IrelandAM in just a minute. Oh my God. Hello, welcome back to IrelandAM. We're with you until 10, and here's what we've got coming up.
Coming up next, 9:20, former Irish rugby star Gordon Darcy is going to be here alongside Olympic rower Sanita Prosport to tell us about why they're joining forces. Well, they're pretty much rowing for a good cause.
Yes.
I don't know how Darcy.
That is. Why? He won't be. Surely he knows how to bloom and row from inside. Anyway, he's dipping his oar, as we said earlier on. We'll find out more about the dipping a little bit later on at 9:35. We're getting expert tips on how to deal with fussy eating when it comes to children. Now, if you would like any advice on this, because we will have an expert, it's not just Tommy going shove it in their mouth. They'll be fine. Don't worry about it. You can get your questions into us. It's 089 611 111.
So frustrating, yes, let us know. Alan's getting a science lesson this morning. Alan, what have we got?
Yes, come here and I'll tell you. Very good. Very good.
Oh my God. The biggest joke I've ever
Come
seen.
here, Phil Smyth is here. My bit of ears after falling out. What are we talking about this morning?
I can't live up to this now. This is perfect. We're talking about our ear, the wonderful function that it does, how music affects us, mood, and look, I'll try to be better.
Okay, thanks for staying with us. Now, earlier on, we were talking to comedian Andrew Ryan, and he was talking about getting married and about, he's having no bridesmaids, no groomsmen, no wedding cake. 2 o'clock. Yeah. They're cutting out all the trimmings and all this sort of thing.
And if they haven't WhatsApped you in the past 2 months, you don't get an invite.
Brutal, yeah. I like it.
And Ellie says, I'm a big believer in small weddings. When we got married in 2021, we originally had nearly 300 people on our guest list. COVID happened, so we cut it down to 100, and it was easier than we thought. We just took out the majority of +1s. Because you don't know who they are. You might never have met them.
You couldn't, yeah.
And you sort of go, if you're coming to my wedding, I want to know you.
Would you be offended, though, if you can't bring your husband or wife?
But not if you haven't met the people. I wouldn't be offended if somebody, me and Carl know everybody together, but do you know what I mean? But I mean, if you didn't know them, they weren't getting the dinner, says Ellie. I love that. Don't know that they're not getting the dinner.
Fair play.
There you have it. Speaking of the dinner, we have an awful lot of text messages coming in about dishwasher stacking. That, according to a report, you could save an extra €24
a year.
If you stack the dishwasher right. But it's brought up an awful lot of texts about people and their dishwasher etiquette. Caroline said, my dad used to despair at all of his daughters. He said they never were capable of loading the dishwasher. It must be a man thing, this, I don't know. There's a lot of dads giving out about it. All we would hear is a tut-tut when he opened it and started to rearrange everything and put it in the right way.
Well, Sharon is on your line of thinking.
Yeah.
Being protective of the dishwasher must be a male thing. My husband is the so-called master of the dishwasher. It drives me nuts. When he's around, of course, I let him place the tablet in. But in reality, I'm with Tommy's wife and I just lob it in when he's not around.
She's a lover.
Good woman.
And listen, an interesting one, Jen said, a dishwasher specialist who came out to fix our Nana's dishwasher years ago said, don't put the dishwasher tablet where it's supposed to go. Put it in the little container for the knives and forks. It works so much better.
There you go. That's what she told me. That's what Lucy said as well. Yeah.
As she lobs it into the back of it.
Aims from the other side of the kitchen. But my thing is sometimes you put it in there and then it doesn't melt completely, and then you pull out your knives and forks and it's got fucking dishwasher stuff all over.
So much going on. There's so
Do you know what?
much going on.
We'll try it. Maybe we'll try it 2 ways. Put it in the thing, see how good it is.
Well, you know what we need to do? We need to get a dishwasher in here or something, and we need to film a dishwasher test. You need to secretly film Lucy lobbing in the dishwasher
Listen, thank you for sending in your texts on that. We have an awful lot more as well, and they're all agreeing with me. Now, coming up after the break, we've an Olympic star and a rugby legend.
Sanita, Buzz4 and Gordon Darcy chat about their world record challenge.
Yeah, we'll see you back here very shortly.
Good morning, you're very welcome back. Now, we are joined by a double bill of sporting champs.
Yes, they've both represented Ireland on the international stage, but now they've joined forces from the world of rugby and rowing to become world title holders once again. Hopefully.
Here to tell us more is world champion rower Sanita Puspur and former Irish Leinster Lions rugby player, the whole lot, Gordon Darcy. Good morning to you both. It's great to have you with us. Darcy, tell us, right, so the fastest 100 kilometres you're rowing as a group in a world record attempt for the RFU Charitable Trust.
Yeah, so we hold, when I say we, my colleagues hold 2 world records already. So we're going for the 3rd one. So this is the over 40s mixed relay, 100 kilometres as quickly as we can.
Surely you'd be getting the tall people, like, you're a bit stuffy.
You had to go there, didn't you? You had to go there.
I mean, do they really just rope you in just because they're here to do an interview?
Listen, it's rowing is like, yeah, that's pretty much all I was brought in for.
Because, like, I mean, you have, like, big second rows like Malcolm O'Kelly, Bob Casey, David Wallace, like, big lads.
So, like, I was looking up to Sanita when I was coming in. I was there, I'm going to add very little to this row.
This is, Sanita, you're pure proper, and you're going in with a bunch of lads who surely did a lot of rowing in training and stuff like that. How did you get roped into this?
Well, after I didn't qualify for Paris in the single, Helen got in touch with me in June, I think it was around June, and she said, look, think about it, you could, it'd be great if you could, and if not, no worries. I was like, sure, I have nothing else going on, so I might as well.
So not qualifying for the Olympics, and you get stuck with Gordon Darcy.
I know, right?
I didn't come here to get Darcy.
It is for a good cause, though, the IRFU Charitable Trust. It's a cause that I've done work for. We all, I think former players always try and do their bit for it.
Yeah, like I think we're all attached in some way to that. I was just checking, Donald O'Flynn was one of my peers coming through school, and he benefited from the Charitable Trust. So the Charitable Trust supports severely injured players, for anybody who doesn't know about it. So at the moment we're supporting 36 players around Ireland, just trying to make their life a little bit easier and more back to, say, a normal level.
And it's serious injuries.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Poor people who've unfortunately got paralysed and all different levels of injury.
So Brendan from Mallow is benefiting from the Charitable Trust. He's getting a fitted van, to the tune of about 120k. They've retrofitted diggers and ride-on lawnmowers. So it is about trying to give people a bit of their life back.
Yeah, it's the community of rugby getting together to kind of go, OK, we're all in this together. And fair play for everything that you do for that. It's really important. And it's lovely that they can open their little black books and you can call on Olympic rowers to get involved.
Yeah.
A very nice thing. But you just touched on there, Sanita, not qualifying this year for Paris. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm coming to terms with it, that my career is kind of ended. It's been great. It's been a lot of ups and lots of downs, obviously. But I think sometimes the sadness hits you that, OK, my sports career is over. I need to move on in my life. But things like this, like having a challenge, 100k, crazy, let's do this. So it kind of keeps you going for a little bit longer.
Are you retiring?
Well, I will be applying for my retirement package this year, I believe,
You think so?
Yeah. But I still might compete in Ireland, So
because, listen, from a rugby point of view, you have a Six Nations every year, you have big competitions all the time. But for the likes of rowing, there are lots of competitions, but the Olympics is the pinnacle. How difficult, with all the training, all the effort that goes in, and you just miss out on qualification?
So that would be my 4th Olympics.
Yeah.
Mentally, it's kind of, it'd be nice to finish on 4th, but at the same time, like I've been there 3 times, and the one regret, not even regret, it's kind of almost like a small little failure. I have like world medals, European medals, World Cup medals. The Olympic medal is the only one I don't have. So that's sad. But then I suppose I've done other great things. I've been in the middle of the podium for 4 times. So that's amazing. But I'll remember that maybe 5 years down the line.
It is amazing. That's the thing. In the moment, it's so hard. No more than for you, Gordon. Like when you're a professional sports player and that's your life, and then you're like, oh God, I have to retire. It's a hard thing.
Yeah, mine was kind of like being old yellow, being brought around the back of the shed and getting 2 in the back of the head. I played.
Leinster, 3 players better.
I played for just under 18 years. So when I had gotten everything out of it, and I wasn't the best player in that position anymore. So in a lot of ways, it was, you know, everybody's agreed. You know, I got a phone call from Joe Schmidt, and it was very, you know, saying, listen, mate, you're not there. And I was like, I knew it before the phone call ever came.
If there's one man who can deliver a message, it's Stuart Smith. Now, not quite taken around the back of the shed. You know I mean, like you're coaching Sanita. Surely she's not at the level of what Joe Schmidt was like back in the day. I mean, he was a pretty tough taskmaster, to be fair.
Yeah, he was. Probably the guy we needed at the time. You know, if it was easy, anybody would do it. And that's pretty much why we've brought in our ringer here for the rowing. She thinks she's only doing the rest of us, but we have this like 15, 20, 30 minutes block in the middle where. I'm only joking, don't worry.
I'm doing all of it.
I'll get a quick injury now.
You're doing 70 kilometres, Sanita, don't mind the rest of it. But you were saying there earlier, like one of the reasons you probably retired is that you were sick of this fella asking for the ball. You're like, oh my God, get over it. You tell me you're not good enough. Is that it? Sick of having to try to pass the
He
ball
never
for him.
bloody passed it. I mean, honestly, there's a whole thing, like if you get the ball past Gordon Darcy, who might have passed it once in a blue moon, you get to O'Driscoll, who's definitely not going to pass it. Then you had Carney. Well, he just didn't know how to pass.
I have the like probably the world record for being either at clearing a ruck or carrying into the ruck before you lads scored. So listen, my 5 international tries.
The best thing about Gordon Darcy is that it was great. You could just skip it past him. That was the thing.
Gordon, you're raising all this money. This is
never let the truth get in the way of the story.
What is it like? Have you done any practice with the guys yet? Do you know the level that you're dealing with in trying to break a world record?
No idea.
No.
Right, okay.
So I've never done a relay yet, so I don't know how it's going to work out. You do your 20 seconds, then you have to basically launch yourself off the erg and then try to jump on it again. I have no idea how it's done.
Right. So it's 100 kilometres. So you're on for 20, 30 seconds, then off again, rest for a few minutes, and then back on again.
Yeah, so somebody will be holding your feet. So it's all about the transitions, all about time. As I said, the relay being in here, you can see Liam Toland, fantastic hair there.
Yeah.
Coming through. So people holding your legs, go as
there.
hard as you can, and then you roll off, next person in, transition.
I didn't realise it's all on the one rowing machine.
Oh, yeah, it has to be, because it's one machine measuring.
Oh, so it is all about transitions and getting on and off. Oh, that is going to be very...
And even for the likes of yourself, Sanita, you have Nora Stapleton, Emer Moran as well, because it is mixed. Have you done practice? You haven't done much practice together?
No,
have you done any practice?
We have.
Individually.
We put a WhatsApp group together.
Okay.
Oh, well, there. It's done.
That's halfway there.
It's done. That's it. But it's kind of... but you've got 2 world records. They've got 2 world records already, so the pressure is kind of on.
Yeah, so there's, and it's been driven by a couple of guys. Nigel Osborne's been fantastic in this. We're doing it in his gym out in Blackrock, and he's been a key driver on this. And it's linked to the challenge. There's a lot of ex-professionals in there that like challenges, physical, into their post their playing career. We're benefiting the charitable trust, and it's going to be a bit of crack. There's families going to be out there. It will be a bit of fun.
It's over 40, so you can't bring your daughter along. I believe she's got the rowing bug.
Yeah, she does. Like she's a bit too young for that one yet. But
what age is she?
She's 16. She picked it up last year. Well, I had to drag her over at first, just to kind of get some exercise for her head and. Yeah, now she's fully in it, seems like it.
Wow.
So I'll have someone to pass the
oars
off and off she goes,
good.
yeah.
Is she a future prospect, do you think?
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, she's
Like
your
1 year at a
mom, she
time,
has to
yeah.
be.
Anything like her mum, no doubt.
Well, my son was smarter. He said too much cardio, thank you, no.
It's absolute. It's so difficult, Rowan, as
Yeah.
well. I have to ask you, November International's coming up, some big, big games for Ireland. They've just gone back to #1 in the world rankings, which is phenomenal. The All Blacks first up, though, at the start of November is going to be a tricky old challenge.
Yeah, and we don't have much view on what's happened in Ireland at the moment. We've got the emerging tour going down to South Africa, so hopefully we see another 2 or 3 players come through in the same way Jack Crowley, Joe McCarthy came through the last time. But the provinces are just getting back up and running now. The challenge will be they won't. This is that first match out of the blocks for Ireland, so we need a bit of anti-viral magic for that first match. You look at, say, New Zealand haven't been getting the results they want in their opening 7 matches, so they will be really, really targeting that match. Bit of animosity, which is no harm, between Ireland and New Zealand, but we have them in our backyard, so I think there's a lot to be hopeful with.
And on a Friday night, it's going to be great atmosphere, a few pints and all before that.
I was just about to say you're planning your weekend.
Oh, I can't wait for it's going to be great. Hey, have you got the new socks on? New business? I hear you're going into new socks as well, or you know?
Yeah, with my wife, we've launched a sock brand called Forum School Apparel. I have some samples here for you. There you go.
You do not.
I do indeed.
I'm not joking.
Stay away from
It's
the old
women's.
clothing
It's
game.
unfortunately we're not doing socks, Tommy, and it's women's socks only.
Hold on, I was just about to say the one thing that you haven't got into, socks.
There
You
we
will
go.
now.
We won't be anymore. Listen, Gordon, Darcy and Sanita Puspor, if people do want to check it out online, if you do want to donate, check out the IRFU Charitable Trust.com. It's an incredible challenge, a world record attempt, all raising money for former rugby players who have fallen on hard times. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Best of luck with it.
After the break, we're going to be discussing the mealtime dilemma parents know all about, fussy eating.
There's still time to get questions in. It's WhatsApp 0896 111 111 if you want to get some answers from our expert. Back with you shortly on IrelandAM.
Now, many children go through a phase of fussy eating, but how can you tell if it is a phase or not?
Here to answer some questions is feeding therapist Teresa Foley. Good morning, Teresa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Morning.
So, fussy eating, is this a thing that happens to most children or is it very rare?
Absolutely. Fussy eating or picky eating is something that I would say an awful lot of children present with at some stage, particularly in the early years. So maybe between 18 months and 3 years, that's kind of when we say peaks. And you'll often see young children at this point start to reject food that they might have eaten previously. So my eldest boy, for example, ate everything until he was 2 years of age. Then all of a sudden he started to reject broccoli, carrots, lasagna, everything. So it was a nightmare until the point where he was basically living for a year or two, I'd say, off chicken dippers and waffles.
Oh,
so
it's
it's a disaster. However, most children do manage to come back from that. Now, my own boy, again, still, I don't see broccoli in his future anytime soon, but he eats well, he eats lots of the food he enjoys, he can eat out, he can eat at parties, he eats at school. So most children, picky or fussy eating, it's annoying for the parents, but it's not really a huge issue for the child in their life. And we probably all know people who've grown up to be adults who have gone on to, maybe they didn't love vegetables until they were an adult, but they were well nourished and lived a very full life with that.
How can it impact a child, though? Because surely if they're eating processed chicken dippers, processed chips, you know, these beige foods all the time, it can't be good for their insides. It can't be good for their health.
Absolutely. And so that's something in my clinic, the feeding therapist, that's something I deal with a lot. So young children in particular, beige processed food, it's actually quite safe in terms of children who are a little bit anxious around their food, because when you think about it, it's very consistent. It always looks the same. It tastes the same. It's the same shape. So for these children, they get security out of knowing that in comparison to a blueberry that might be a different consistency every time, they know this is going to feel the same.
But it's not healthy.
It's not ideal, but believe it or not, there's still a good bit of nutrition. Processed food is okay. It's not ideal, I know.
They're all are the exact same. Like, what percentage of chicken would be in it?
I watched them the other day. Apparently there's like 64% chicken in a goujon. So I mean, look, it's not my preference.
64%.
But there is, listen, this is about, you know, there's issues obviously with obesity amongst children in this country, huge issues with that.
Agreed.
But also this is picky and fussy eating. Can it be, if you're like, oh my God, my child has just gotten really picky and it's annoying, can it be symptom of something else?
It can be. And so there's another category of this struggle called problem eating. And so lots of parents, initially their child might just, as you described, present as kind of picky, fussy, start to reject foods. But gradually the problem can worsen to the point where parents might come to me and say, you know what, in the last 2 years, they've gone down to maybe only eating 6, 7, 8 foods in total. And that's when we start to worry about things like nutrition, weight, height, all of these medical implications. And also, if you think about it, like it can start to impact their social isolation, the family's enjoyment of meal times. If every time the child's coming to the table, they're refusing food, they're stressing about food, it starts to have a massive impact very quickly. And, you know, when you think about it, for me, I love food, I love eating, I love going out to eat. But if every time you sit down to eat, it's a struggle and a stress, it can quickly become a massive problem, not just for the child, but for the whole family.
And parents don't want the hassle of it, to have to make a whole meal and have to deal with the arguments. I mean, it is easier to just give them the chicken dippers or whatever else just to save the arguments.
I agree, and that's something I did myself with my own boy when he was initially a fussy eater. We probably just started to give him what he wanted, and then gradually his food did start to restrict to the point where we were going, hang on, this is not great.
When does it become a problem? Like, when do you think...
Yeah,
when do we
really
need to
question.
step in?
I actually have a questionnaire on my website. The parents can go and they can decide after they go through that if their child is more about what we call picky, kind of fussy eater, or if there might be some concerns around problematic eating, if they might need some specific kind of medical or feeding therapist help.
So that's a questionnaire. It's on the feeding therapists on your website there.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you, children with autism,
yes,
there might be an issue around food, as you were mentioning, food
Absolutely.
Consistency. That's a big thing, isn't it?
For sure, yes. So sensory processing issues in food, that's a really big thing that I see in my work as an occupational therapist. So it's estimated that about 80% of children on the autistic spectrum will present with some issues with food. So that's a massive percentage for these children. And these issues can range from mild issues to really, really severe anxiety around eating and the texture of food, any of the sensory processing elements of food. It can be hugely stressful for these children. And there's also a couple of conditions to be aware of. One is called avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, ARFID. It's a very new diagnosis that we're still only learning about, but it's something that I work with a lot. And paediatric feeding disorder is another one that we're kind of working with now as well.
Okay. Can you give us some do's and do nots?
Okay. So, number one, never let the child go hungry in the hope that they will eat, because this doesn't ever work. Take it from me.
Okay. So that's how we all grew up.
It's going to have to work, otherwise they're not going to eat.
There's been a lot of well-intended grandparents who said that over the years. Just let them go hungry and they'll eat. That does not work. Don't ever do what I've done myself in the past, try and hide vegetables in pasta sauce. That has backfired really badly on me. And you run the risk of the child then rejecting that food because they don't trust it anymore.
You blend it up, though.
You can do that, but you need to let the child know you're doing that.
No, you don't. Why? Why? What do you mean? Like,
because
they're getting the good food into them.
I did it myself one day at home. I blended cauliflower into my children's pesto pasta, and they were like, "What is that? I'm not eating that." And for about 5 months after that, they were like, "No, you might have cauliflower
the
in there."
hidden veg pasta, that's the best one.
They really
that one.
So I'm not advising that, Tommy.
Oh, sorry. Hidden veg.
In the pasta.
Peppers, tomatoes, broccoli, the whole lot. Blend it all up, turn it into a sauce. Sorry, back to the experts.
No, and to be fair, I'm not taking experts' advice. I'm so surprised. What are the don'ts, basically, Tommy?
They were don'ts. What are the do's then?
So the do's, look, try and as much as you can, keep it relaxed, playful. You know, even if you're raging inside, you're chill. This is all chill. You don't want the lovely dinner.
You're not getting to me.
That's fine. Yeah, it's all good. They don't want to eat it. That's fine. Don't get into an argument. Don't get into a back and forth.
Get a punching bag.
Try again the next day. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe something like that. We've got some questions. Why has my 3-year-old stopped eating all vegetables and fruit? They used to be a great eater. What should I do?
Okay, so again, number one, just stay chill. It's all good.
Okay.
Continue to allow them to be exposed to these foods. So even if they are refusing them, that's okay, no problem. But give them a tiny amount. Now, I'm talking teeny, tiny amounts. Maybe they might not want them on the plate. That's fine. You can use something like a divider plate, so they're still beside them on the plate. Maybe you can get them involved in food preparation, you know, chopping up things. So there's no pressure to eat the food.
Good.
Yeah, even things like, you know, squeezing lemon on your dinner. So they don't actually have to eat the food, or even just putting salt and pepper on it. So there's no pressure to eat the food, but it's fun. They're taking part in meal times. Things like lovely, you know, family things like a pizza party, pancake party, taco night, movie night with like popcorn and things like that. Getting them involved in all those nice things.
That's a good idea.
Quickly, just my child only eats in front of a screen.
Okay, this is, I could probably spend all morning talking just about this. This is very divisive at the moment. I would say...
I get divisive.
Yeah. Do what works for you and your family. If it's working for you at the moment, you do you. However, for a lot of families, it's not the long-term preference. It wouldn't be for me and my family. I can work with families on this. There is always a way, no matter, even if the child is neurodivergent, whatever, we can always work away from that, but it takes time and you have to go at the child's pace. We can never impose anything on children when it comes to eating because it will just lose their trust and security.
Wow. So taking that screen away, it's like a poverty. That's how I eat. In front of a screen. So do you eat on screen.
Teresa Foley, paediatric occupational therapist and feeding therapist. What's your website again, sorry?
The feedingtherapist.co.uk.
Feedingtherapist.co.uk. Thank you so much. Alan, what have we got next?
Well, Tommy, we're learning how certain noises impact our mood with our resident science man here, Phil Smyth. See, it's very interesting. See you in a few minutes. Thanks for staying with us. Now, whether it's nails on a chalkboard, or a fresh brew being poured, much nicer. Certain noises can make our skin crawl or our hearts melt.
Yes, it is the sound of science. And here to explain it all is scientist Phil Smyth. Good morning
Phil.
to you, Phil. Tell us, before we get into the ear and everything else, how is sound produced?
Sound is a vibration, and it's everywhere. Actually, all science is vibrations, actually. So it's the essence of science is something moving in some ways. It's universal. It needs a medium to go through. So science can't go through a vacuum. So that's why in space no one can hear you scream, because they won't need something to go through unless there's something travelling through. So it travels through things. So when I'm talking to you, it travels through the air. So air goes back and forth and shapes it. If you're in water, it travels 4 times faster. So if you're ever underwater or anything else, it's very difficult to hear where sound is coming because your ears have been conditioned to figure out by just like when sound is coming from over there, it hits your ear first, hits this ear a little bit later, so you're able to direction and figure out where sound is coming from.
And are these sound waves that we hear about, is that what it is?
Yeah, it's a sound wave. So sound waves are like longitudinal, so they're compression waves. They go back and forward. They travel through different ways. We produce sound ourselves. Obviously, we're sound boxes. We're resonance. We're hollow. So we've got sinuses. We've got all these places. So when we produce sounds, we're producing vibrations in our bodies that actually then propagate out and we hear different things. So the sound waves go out. So if you have like a balloon pop, you've got lots of gas together, it pops, that wave will then go out like a giant sphere going out and eventually hit your ears.
And what's the noise from that? Is it the bursting, is it the balloon, the physical balloon, or is it the air coming out?
It's the physical balloon, but it's then a pressure wave that comes out and goes. So you're creating waves coming out of your mouth and the vibrations start. So obviously you've got a diaphragm that pulls in and helps you pull air into your lungs, but their air then passes over your larynx. So even if you put your hand over your throats and go ooh, and keep repeating it, you'll feel different vibrations. So the vibrations are different. Ooh,
the E. Like if talk to us about the ear then.
Like if you can hear.
How complex it is.
It's really, really complex. Really good. Obviously, they're like satellite dishes guiding waves in. Your ear canal, so ear comes down, it hits your eardrum. That vibrates. So like a drum you'd hit, it vibrates. Then you've got 3 bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. The stapes is the smallest bone in your body, and that's connected to your inner ear. Your inner ear is made up of the semicircular canals and the cochlea.
Where's your inner ear here?
So your inner ear is in here. So
Which is the stinkies?
The stinkies. The stapies are the smallest one that's there at the back. So that's your eardrum, what's connected to the bones.
Okay.
So it vibrates. So your ear does two. It does your balance because it has like the directions. So which way you're going, depending. Like so, if you have, this is a very crude example. So there's little hairs in your ear. So if I turn this way or that way, the hairs move. Fluid moves over it, so your ear knows that you're moving that way. And if you actually like spin around and spin around and spin around and spin around and stop, that keeps moving, and it gets
dizzy, is it?
Mixed signals to your brain. So your brain actually thinks, I'm getting signal that I'm moving, but my eyes are telling me I'm still. So it thinks you're poisoned. So that's why you feel nauseous.
It's in fluid,
It's in fluid. So there's fluid in them, and then there's also fluid in your cochlea, which is shaped like a snail, and different tones are heard at different heights. So like tubas and stuff will be heard at the top, whereas like trumpets and smaller things will be heard at the bottom. So different types.
And when you're talking about hearing, like when you're saying animals, like dogs have different hearing, who has the best hearing on the planet?
So only dogs can hear you now is a true statement because they have different ranges. Bats can hear up to 200,000 hertz. So they use echolocation. So they send out waves and they hear back really quickly so they don't fly into walls in the dark, essentially.
So the bats have the best hearing of any animal.
As far as I know, 200,000 hertz is what they're at.
Compared to a human?
Human about 20 to 20,000 hertz, and then dogs will go up to about 45.
Sorry, 20 or 20,000?
22. So the range is where, like, so you can hear in a range. Okay. So you can hear, so the hertzes are how fast a signal goes past a point in a second. So you're seeing that, like, from a low range up to a 20,000. So we can hear in this range, dogs can hear here, bats can hear all the way out here.
What is it when, just now we're talking here.
Yes.
And we're just chatting.
Sure.
I'm aware of my voice, but I hate listening back to myself.
Really?
I just think, oh my God, do I really speak like that?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because think about what we're saying, that air has to go through a medium. So when I speak to you, it comes out of me and you hear it in my ears. But what I'm hearing is it coming out and hitting my ears that way. But you're also hearing it from touching me. So the vibrations are in me. It vibrates internally to my eardrum as well. So I'm hearing a combination of those signals, which is quite cool because then you're getting this combination. If you're in the shower and you put your fingers in your ear, or anything like that, you hear the sound of the raindrops hitting your hollow head, and it's weird. So you can actually do. I know it's a
hollow head.
Yeah. Some of us have more hollow heads than others.
Exactly. How important? Because the great speakers, the Martin Luther Kings, Steve Jobs, they spoke at a certain cadence that it really engaged people. How important is tempo and say cadence?
Tempo is like the beautiful thing about sound, and particularly music, is that it unifies all of us. Like the first sounds that we hear are our mother's heartbeat, and it sets the real, I suppose, the ingrained thing in us of tempo. So when your mom is calm and you're inside, her heart rate is relatively slow. I think we've actually a sound of music we're going to play in a second of about 20 beats per minute. It's calming. And then as she got excited or worried or anything else, her heartbeat gets faster. So you get like, what's going on? And you think about it now. So if we play this sound...
So tempo is very important.
Very important.
Okay,
so
20 beats. This is 20 beats.
20 beats per minute. So if you play it now...
Yeah.
See, I want you... What kind of emotions do you feel when you hear this?
Doom, gloom.
Doom, gloom. And you're kind of like... There's almost like there's someone like sneaking around really kind of slow as well. But if we play the next clip after this, which will be much faster, which is the same sequence of notes.
Yeah. So like the last one would be Alan walking into the room, then this one would be me walking into the room.
But you see the emotions
creep in.
Yeah, creep in. And then Alan's like, oh, tell me right. But the emotions are different.
Yeah.
So when you have a great speaker and comes out like that and talks, you have these different things. But it also how they speak to people is different. Like even with the ums and ahs, trust as well. If you're too polished sometimes, particularly with an American audience, they don't trust you, which is why George Bush was so like, oh, I'd like to have a beer with him. He seems natural. Whereas Barack Obama, when he was speaking, he used to always go, and people were like, well, he's making it up on the spot. And as he got more polished, they didn't trust him, so then he added that back in artificially. So it's all that kind of talking helps people.
What is this? What is this here?
So this is okay. I bought a snazzy piece of kit with me. Now this, if you could see, looks very pretty on the front. It's a ferrofluid. It's a liquid that's magnetic. Now, this is a way to visualize sound. So as I talk, it's kind of bouncing up and down here. So speakers move by creating those sound waves back and forth. There's a speaker in this that's moving back and forth, so causing the magnet to move the liquid that's a magnetic liquid. So it's actually visualizing what's happening inside. And this is why science and art are always great to go hand in hand together, because you can visualize stuff and get... Because if I came on here and I'm just talking about your ears, people are like, oh, that's... Yeah, thanks, Danny. I was actually hoping you'd go. No, it's great, but you didn't.
I wish you were my teacher. Phil.
Thank you. Oh, I am still. So if I play this with some music, you can actually see it dance like an equaliser you would have in an old stereo. And it's beautiful, but it's a way to include and bring people in. And that's what we try and do in Science Week in November. So we're running talks and these types of things with the festival called Come Here Till I Tell You.
Come here till I tell you.
I know, I still can't
You
live
know
up to
these
it.
myths that, like, a sound could shatter a wine glass?
Oh, yeah.
Can it?
Yes.
Can it?
It can, but it's very difficult. So there has to be like a high C legend to actually make it. What you're trying to get.
Some opera singer would shatter a glass.
But it has to be its resonant frequency. So resonant frequency, which is a little bit difficult to explain, but if you imagine that if I tap something, a sound wave goes through it and comes back and goes through it and goes back until it dissipates or leaves it.
Okay.
If you add a sound wave into it and then just at the right point you add another one into it and add another one into it, it builds up and builds up and builds up energy inside it till if there's a little flaw in the glass, then it shatters. So you
Tell us, come here
till I tell you.
When is it on?
It's in second week of November and the website will launch next week. But if you follow me on Phil of Science, you'll find it out.
Where's it on?
It's on in pubs and clubs in Dublin, not adult audiences, grown-up audience.
Phil of Science on social media, Phil Smyth. Brilliant, Harry. Thank you so much for that. Well, very interesting. What have we got tomorrow, Warren?
I thoroughly enjoyed that. Fantastic. On tomorrow's show, Davina McCall's go-to hairstylist and fella, Michael Douglas, is going to be dropping by. Journalist turned author Sinead Crowley gives us the lowdown on her latest novel. There'll be expert tips on parenting and a duck dish. That's coming up tomorrow on IrelandAM. Bye.